Michael ran through the doors and over to them as fast as he could. He could feel his heart beating in his chest. He yelled and waved and did everything else he could think of to get their attention. The person who was cutting down the tree stopped what he was doing and looked at him. He called someone, then gave him his phone. Michael was married to Emma, and they lived near Nashville, Tennessee. They had just moved in and wanted to make a few small changes to make their home more unique. There were a lot of houses in the area, and all of their yards looked the same. The property line was marked by trees. They wanted it to be different in some way. The oak trees that surrounded their yard were one of their favorite parts of the property. This was a big reason why they chose to buy the house. But there were many mulberry trees among the oak trees that blocked the sun. They decided to get prices from different places in town to see who could do it for less. The argument began when they were given an estimate for removing the mulberry tree that constantly obstructed their view of the sunrise. The extent of the impending disaster was unknown to them. Even though they were given a lot of money, they declined because they liked the oak trees in their backyard, which provided some much-needed seclusion from the busy street. Michael dismissed it as unimportant. Should have been a given that he did. See, just before Michael and his wife moved there, their neighbor spent a ton of money constructing a front porch. It had a fire pit, lights that hung from the ceiling, a jacuzzi, and a pizza oven. Michael and his wife moved into a house where the neighbor had renovated the porch and installed a jacuzzi, pizza oven, and everything else. He, therefore, asked anything of them. Michael would be lying if he said he didn't feel a little bit of envy. But this new addition had a problem. Michael's neighbor would often lie in his jacuzzi in the afternoons after work, but there was a problem. Michael and his wife had a tremendous amount of affection for the oak trees, but their next-door neighbor did not share this sentiment. His jacuzzi would be in the shadow throughout the day as a result of the oak trees that surrounded it. Their neighbor owned a business that cut down trees, and he asked if he could look at the job. He wasn't just there for the quote. Michael simply desired to price less than the competition. But he had no idea what his neighbor was up to. Michael told him that he would send him a quote while he was out of town. But it looked like he would never. Michael didn't know how to cut down trees, so he asked his neighbor to teach him. He didn't know anything about any of this, so he was glad for the help. But in just 1 week, Michael's eyes were red. He would yell at the strange person he saw in his yard. What was happening? When they got home from their trip, they saw something terrible. Michael's wife had to get back to work quickly, so he was the only one who knew what was going on while she was gone. Michael was confused because he had just come home and heard machinery. He went to the source, which was his backyard. He had trucks and diggers in his yard. He saw that the logo on the side was for his neighbor's business. Then he figured out what was happening. At the end of his yard, they had already started cutting down trees. Not just the person they wanted to get rid of. No, because they had already cut down some of the trees they loved. Michael's heart was beating fast as he broke through the doors, ran down to them, and yelled at them to stop. He was shouting, but the loud machinery made it hard to hear him. When one worker saw Michael running toward him, he turned off his engine right away. When he got what he was saying, he jumped out of the boat and waved for his crew to stop what they were doing. Michael looked around at the damage and asked him angrily, "Who let them do this?" He said that their boss, his neighbor, had told them to cut down these trees. Michael took a quick look at the damage and wanted to cry. His yard was now full of broken branches, trampled grass, and broken flower beds. And in the middle of it all, the stumps of his beautiful oak trees that had been cut down. Michael started to get angry. He couldn't believe that this was done by his neighbor. Michael told him that he had never agreed to any work being done here. He was very confused. The worker called his boss, who was Michael's neighbor, right away and gave him the phone. After a short, heated conversation, they ended the call. When the workers left his property, Michael was left with a lot of broken trees and other trash. This was only the start. Michael thought about what to do next, but he couldn't do anything. The trees were gone, and a row of dead stumps was all that was left. He tried to talk to his crazy neighbor about it, but he was hiding, and his phone went straight to voicemail. Then, to make things worse, he found a note under the front door that his neighbor had left for him. Michael was angry after reading the note. He went to Reddit to get advice from people who didn't know him. "When I got home from vacation last week, there were 2 tree stumps, the grass was mowed down, and there was a letter telling me to expect a $2,000 Venmo payment," Michael wrote in an angry Reddit post. His next-door neighbor was certain that if they threw enough money at the problem, it would go away. When Michael's wife got home, she was heartbroken to find that her favorite trees had been cut down. She didn't like that she could now see the cars driving by on the busy road that was hidden by their old trees. They wanted to talk to their neighbor about it the next day, but there was a problem. After a night of heavy rain, the trees that had been cut down and left in a mess on their land had slid onto the busy road. When they woke up, the police were at their door. They were told that the trees belonged to them and that they would have to pay for the cost of moving these big trees by the city. As a lawyer, Michael's wife was able to explain the situation while deftly avoiding taking any responsibility for what had happened. Things, however, quickly took an intriguing turn. In just a few days, hundreds of people had replied to Michael's Reddit post. Many users were as confused as he was, but one of them told him to ask the same question in a different thread called Our Tree Law. He was unable to believe what he was reading on that Reddit forum. Michael didn't know that there were lawyers who were experts in something called arboreal arbitration. A California tree lawyer named Barry Bonaparte says, "Tree law is everything you can think of that could cause people to fight over trees." As soon as he moved his post to the new thread, everyone told him to call an arborist as soon as possible. Michael found out he could do something about his bold neighbor after all. Michael finally had a plan after weeks of back and forth and growing anger over the loss of their beautiful trees. They ended up hiring an arborist, also known as a tree doctor, to figure out how much the trees they had lost were worth so that their neighbor would admit he had done something wrong and pay up. People on the Reddit thread were anxiously waiting for Michael to post a new message. "I promise you that we all can't wait to hear how many zeros are in the arborist's estimate, so you must promise to post updates often," one user wrote. "Who doesn't love a good dose of justice that's long overdue?" asked another. And when he did that, everyone went crazy. To the couple's surprise, their oak trees were worth a crazy amount of money because they were rare and took hundreds of years to grow. Then, they hired an attorney and gave him all the information they had learned from the tree doctor and the bill that the council had left hanging over the road to clean it up. Then he told them how much they could sue the company of his neighbor for. Because of their neighbor's mistake, they had to file a lawsuit for $1.2 million to pay for all the damage it caused. This included the costs of hiring an attorney, the money needed to clean up the road, and the amount of money the decades-old trees that he cut down were worth. The neighbor went out of business and shut down his business. He sold his house and left the area. Michael and his wife had to pay nothing. Michael wrote in his update, "It looks like it's going to take a long time, several months, maybe even until September, since the process didn't start until this week because of the holidays, but I'll get all 12 trees back on my property for free. I'd like to thank everyone for all the advice they gave me. It was very helpful." He went on, "I didn't know you were also into trees, but I'm glad you are.